The Manufacturing Edge, where ops leaders break barriers, drive growth, and redefine what's possible. Welcome to part 3 of the 80's called, and they want their management system back. In the final episode in the series, the team dives into best practices and pitfalls in implementing a digital management system.
Really great to be back with Paul and Bill for the final part of our series. Strategy clearly plays a big role in developing a new management system or even digitizing an existing one. Beyond that, though, why do you both think companies often stumble when trying to go digital without the support of a firm like TBM?
I don't know that there's complete failures, but they do struggle more sometimes because of if their management system is not very well defined, robust, and practiced and followed rigorously, then again, when you're trying to do it digitally, you're still figuring out some things. You're trying to get change from people that are already executing in one way, and you're now asking them to do something different. And you're trying to digitize it at the same time. Those things can just get overly complicated. And the consistency, again, I'll go back to a comment Paul made. If it's through multiple systems and solutions or point solutions, and you're trying to connect and integrate yourself, that becomes in a place that it's not aligned with the mission of what most manufacturing companies or supply chain companies are trying to do, which is focus on their customers, focus on their execution, and not be system integrators, right? That dilutes resources and time. If you bring solutions like iObeya with our knowledge and structure building around management systems, we can get you there and help you stand that up in a way that you're focusing on running your business and you're not focusing on these point solutions and how do I get them to connect and what do we have to do there, and then asking people to do something differently. When we're implementing a digital management system, we're going to get consistency of what we're asking people to do across the board because we have a consistent platform that's behind it, right?
And I think just to pile on a little bit, I think digitizing like any change in how people do things, like you were talking about, you were asking them to change the way they work. It needs to be supported and managed. I mean, I often use the expression that humans don't like change. Now, well, I think that's generally true. I think it's not true when people know why they're making the change, what it means for them, and how it will impact them in a positive way, like when they're supported. So I think that's the big difference, is that making sure people like, why am I being asked to do this? What difference is this going to make to me, my job, and the impact I make? And how is this going to be better for both me and the organization?
Yeah, Paul, I think that's key because, first of all, just good fundamental change management practice and approaches are I think are a given anytime you do anything like this or any other initiative in the factory. But that aside, when you go to the frontline teams and say we're gonna implement this, or we want to do, we want to drive this forward, they're going to say, is this one more extra thing I have to do? What comes off my plate? And it's the old what's in it for me, which is very fair and relevant because if you can show them that this is easier to work with, and that it makes their jobs easier and they're more effective at what they're trying to do and drive more collaboration and engagement in those frontline teams, is where the magic will happen. Because we all know the kind of the cliche, but if you get 5 or 6 people around there looking at the same problem, you're going to do better than if you got one person. Now, iObeya naturally facilitates that, right? Because we're not adding to administrative burden. We simplified that actually to now, if I say, guys, let's do a quick brainstorming on this problem, or let's do a quick 5 why on this issue, and I'm going to use my template in iObeya to do that. I don't spend any time. I go straight to the board. I can pull it up, and now I start working, and we can facilitate that quick brainstorming with the team.
And everybody can participate in person or remotely.
Yeah,
they don't have to be in the same room, but they can be.
Well, and the other cool thing is that can stay up on the board, right? It's visible in your room. So as if I'm going, let's say we do a quick 15, 20-minute brainstorming in the morning after our stand-up meeting. And then as we go through the day, people think of other things. They can go by and add or edit right with the board. So it's not static. And it's, to Paul's point, it's not on a flip chart somewhere that I can't find it, or it's pasted on the wall. And, it becomes cumbersome to add. It's like, hey, I got to go find another page. Got to add some stuff. You just streamline that and make it easier. This is now I can walk up, attach it, add an item, type it in, and away you go. Right.
Yeah, Bill, you touched on not being able to find things, and it seems like such a simple problem that can become really common if an implementation isn't done the right way. What are some of the other common failure points that happen with implementation or during ongoing management, and how can TBM and iObeya help avoid those?
Well, I think you kind of conflated a little bit, like the missing and losing things, talking about kind of like the physical analog world. Um, but I think that one of the things that iObeya can do is like minimize that. I think that one of iObeya's superpowers is the ability to support a process and not dictate it, right? So this assumes a solid process is there to support. And again, that's what I'm going to drone on about this, about the partnership, about having that expertise in the daily management system from TBM to be able to support that. Um, you know, so the combination of their expertise in daily management systems and deep domain knowledge in lean makes sure the most important thing is being kept on track. The ability to set strategic direction and track that down to daily work on the shop floor and everywhere in between.
I think, to your question, Will, I think some of the other things that happen when we're doing a manual or paper based system and we try to incorporate leader standard work, you can clearly do that with a piece of paper. We can do it with punch cards in a time card slot that we do and turn over. That's fine. That the administration of that is not overly burdensome. But what we've seen is the ability, and the reason we are developing and launching a leader standard work app that is complementary with iObeya and will tie directly in, is that now as a leader, I can have a web or mobile app where I can identify my leader standard work daily, weekly, monthly. And what's really important is let's say I'm doing part of what I need to do is I need to go do a standard work audit on somewhere on the line. And that's my leader standard work for today. When I go do that audit, what the app can allow you to do is to collect pictures of what you've seen, add comments, add notes, and create follow-up actions that you can then, what we're going to enable is that you can then push that to an action directly in iObeya and assign it to yourself or to someone else, and the speed with which you can share your findings of things. Obviously, when you do a standard work audit, you should engage directly with that frontline leader and give them the feedback immediately. But if you have broader things that you want to share, this will enable sharing that in a much more expeditious fashion than having my piece of paper or my punch card in a slot that I'm using, right? And that's the point of it. And the same is true for the hour by hour or power app we have in place that lets you collect that data in a manual way and push it into iObeya and your SQDC. And now, so we're still typing it, but I can either do it on the board or I can do it in the app, and now it becomes easier, right?
Yeah.
And what you really focus on is understanding the condition of the business and performance to my targets, and less about just the administrative side of keeping score.
We have elements within iObeya that cover some of those things. Hour by Hour app is an interesting addition. We have a Gemba app that's in beta right now with a number of our large customers that will be similar but not the same to the Leader Standard Work app, right? But this is the power of this partnership, is that I think that the TBM is on the ground with the customers, seeing what they need and able to build up an app that can integrate directly into iObeya and make iObeya that much more powerful.
Yeah, I think it is. And I view the Gemba app, Paul, and Leader Standard Work and Hour by Hour as all being complementary that round out the robustness
Right. Yeah.
of the management system. So if part of my Leader Standard Work today is to go do a Gemba walk in a particular area, it's going to exist on my Leader Standard Work app, but this is what I'm supposed to do. And then I go to the Gemba app and use it to actually do my Gemba, my observations, and so on. And now it becomes, and we're really focusing together on how do you create an integrated day in the life of a leader in operations at different levels, right? And what does that look like for them to make it very innate, tech enabled, digital enabled, very integrated, and minimize that administrative time to do these things that are important to understanding the condition of the business.
Yeah, we touched on that end state and final optimized process flow, but what's the right way to get there and the right approach to take? Can you explain that from a process definition and technology rollout perspective?
I'll start with our view of it, and Paul can chime in. But we we think crawl, walk, run. So, and that means start with the basics, start with a paper system if you have it, refine it, get it like you want it. Then let's do a proof of concept on one line with iObeya and get that functioning and make that digital, narrow and deep in the one area or a area, and then now talk about when we migrate that across areas and now go across plants and facilities, because you will learn so many things along the way that if you go too big and too wide, you will add complexity and difficulty that is going to really extend your timeline, and probably in retrospect you'll find was not all that productive.
Yeah, the implementation rollout, the proven sort of winning formula that we've found is that we pick a site, right? So you pick the most sort of open site to it, and so you say, okay, we're going to start with this line or these two lines in this one site, and it's exactly as Bill was just saying. You pick these sites. You create baseline room templates for baseline KPIs, baseline room templates, that kind of thing.
And I think, Paul, it follows pretty good change management rationale in terms of, let's think about where early adopters are and go there first. But what we can do is we're then migrating across places. If we have parts of the organization that we think might be more resistant or slower to adopt, we can involve them earlier and let them be part of some of those rollouts and have visibility to that, so that as they know, okay, wow, they get exposed and they go, okay, this might work, or, oh, I think I like this. And you'll start to bring them in and start to build some buy-in before you get there. It also just, TBM's mentality is an inch wide and a mile deep, as opposed to an inch deep and a mile wide, right? And so it's the narrow and deep. Let's get it right. And I remember working with another CI leader at a client a while back. They called it prove and move, right? Let's prove it. Let's get it working. Now move to the next one. Prove it. Move to the next one. And I think that's a sound rationale.
But Bill, you mentioned there at the beginning, starting with the end in mind when it comes to implementation. What should leaders be solving for when they start their journey?
I think, to me, I think with a lot of things, there's value in a collaborative piece of work up front or some time spent up front, really almost creating a vision of what's possible and driving to that vision, recognizing that your vision of what a day in the life of a supervisor, the day in a life of anyone in the team who will interact with this is going to look like. Again, it may be aspirational, but it gives us something to strive for. It gives us something of how we want it to look. And we can always, at least qualitatively, assess how close are we to that? What does it feel? Does it feel right? Does it feel functional? What do we need to knock down to get it closer to the vision of where we want to be in the future state? And I think so there's value in doing that and then letting that guide the specifics of your implementation.
It kind of makes me think. So, what are they trying to solve? Well, they're really, I think, in essence, they're trying to solve the problem of democratizing data and information within their organization. Because it's like, how do we accelerate good decision making? As accelerating good decision making accelerates our business. How do I know if if the company or any part of it is on target? Like this, it's all about, and again, that comes back to that information and being able to get access to the information at the right time. And I think that's a core thing of what people are really trying to solve when they're looking at this.
And I think so, Paul, it even goes to some things we've seen in the last couple of Rockwell Automation annual studies on digitization and performance, and that an awful lot of companies, somewhere in the mid 30%, don't use their data effectively to run the business every day. With this approach, we're going to hone in on, from a top down, the initiatives that drive to the KPIs, and then how do you implement that bottom up so that we know we're really effectively using the right data and the right things to run the business and make the decisions about performance, as opposed to starting, well, okay, well, we've got all this data. What do we want? Right? It's like going to the data buffet and I'm overwhelmed. I'm like, I don't know. Right.
You remind me of a hilarious story. So back in the day, I worked at a software company, and people kept asking, "Can you integrate with product X?" And we're like, "Yes, we can. What would you like it to do? What would you want to integrate?" And then it's just deer in headlights every time. And then they just say everything because they didn't know. And it's the same reason why when people say, "Well, each digital Obeya room can have up to 40 boards," and you don't have to use 40, you don't need to use 20 or 10, you can use one and it's fully utilized. But why is there a limit of 40? It's because if everything's important, nothing's important. So you have to put some kind of constraints on people or they'll just fill it. And so that goes directly to your point, Bill, about just, you can be buried in data and that's not going to help you. You have to have the access to the right data.
It's what my wife says about an empty garage stall of I'll fill it with motorcycles. And so I'm prevented from having an empty garage stall. But it is, if you have, I think focus is key, right? In what are the critical few things that make a difference in the execution of the business? It's not everything. And when we do say everything, especially in the digital world, that can lead to a very big IT bill and a big effort that may or may not be fully utilized. And you're going to invest a lot and take a lot of time. What we also want to enable is not just speed to problem solving, but speed to implement. So not, and I never mean reckless speed, but we want to be rigorous in terms of getting things online and used so that we can get a better sense of how the business is doing and problem solving. So it can't be everything because, again, we've seen this before in the past. I remember when I worked for a very large aerospace company and we had to send the monthly performance, or I guess it was quarterly, and we would put together these PowerPoint 4-up charts, and the book that you would send to corporate could have 100 pages of double-sided 4-up charts. And you're going, who is reading that? And what are you using it for to make the business better? Because that is, like the carpet bombing of information that you're like, I don't even know where to start with all this. But that was the approach. And now the way we think about it, and the way I think that is more common, is let's focus on the critical few things that are aligned to know we're going to deliver strategically and to this year's operating plan in a way that will be meaningful to the business, right? And to all the stakeholders.
Yeah, it seems like a flow of data like that could be to check boxes, it may be to be used reactively instead of being used proactively for insights. But Bill, you mentioned plotting and starting this type of implementation on a single line. Also, though, that it's important to be speedy. So what's the benefit of starting small on a single production line? And then how does that scale going forward?
Well, it is the move and prove, right? So you do many, many things, right? You get people enrolled in getting on board with the digital approach. You learn the specifics in the work, you refine work methods, and you enable the frontline work teams at the points of impact to leverage that for the most effective performance possible, right? To build their performance and to enable them to be successful, which is what the point of the management system is about ultimately. Really, it's to not overcomplicate that. I want to drive down measurements of performance to the points of impact across the whole business so that frontline teams can work and manage effectively to know they're hitting the targets, so that as we roll it up, we know we're delivering as a business. And when we're not, we've got quickly the power of the data and the current situation in the hands of the people that can make a difference to it. And when they need help, that's what the escalations are for, to say, this is a bigger problem than I can handle with my team. I need help. Let me escalate that, and gives leaders at the next levels the ability to see systemic across the business if we're having common problems, right? And connect those and bring the right resources to bear. Conceptually, it's not overly complicated, but it's the speed with which you can put something in place to make that happen with a minimum amount of administrative burden, right?
And I think the other aspect is that it's not unlike the reason why software development moved, a lot of software development moved from sort of like the big bang, kind of like all of the requirements up front. You build the software in its entirety and you deliver it to a customer, because by the time you deliver it to the customer, it's not what the customer wants anymore. So it moved to more of an iterative, quick release. So we release some software, we inspect and we adapt, and we continue building the software as we go along, because those requirements may change over time. Same thing with this, is that you do one production line, couple production lines, and you're able to inspect and adapt along the way, as opposed to building out this massive system and then realizing at the end, oh, this actually should be working like this. It becomes much more manageable in that way.
And you may find some differences too from plant to plant, line to line, that become just some flavors of how you implement, that don't fundamentally change the structure, but do change the specifics of what you implement and how you implement it. And you'll uncover things as you're doing it that if you did go more for the big bang and the let's do it all at once, you're going to miss, right?
With all the wealth of implementation experience and management system experience that we have between Bill, you,
I'm happy
and Paul,
to.
can both
So
of you
I
share a proof of
mentioned
concept story
before
that turned into a broader
fast moving
success?
consumer goods customer that has moved their daily management meeting, cut that time in half, their tiered meeting. Now this is one that started on a single line in a single plant, moved to a couple lines in that single plant. Then we moved to the entire plant, and then we'd had an aggressive rollout period over across, now I think they're at 30 something plants, and that happened over 4 or 5 months. And so they're having, I don't know, it's well over 100 of those meetings a day, right? And we cut the time in half for all of those people. To me, that is a massive success story of, we started small, we got it right, and we built it out. And they're actually now in the process of basically doubling the size of their use of iObeya now.
Well, I can think of a case where we have implemented even in a paper system. There was a client that I specifically worked with where we were focusing on changeover time in a cell. So we had a cell with 3 or 4 pieces of equipment, and we had to change over the whole cell all at once. And in the first couple of Kaizen events we did with the cell, we cut it substantially. Overall, we followed the model, and that by the time we were through the first 2 iterations, we'd reduced setup time about 80% from where it started. But then it was on the it was now a metric on the SQDC board to track that setup time over time. And what that did is when they would have a rough one, they would have to plot their dot, and everybody would go, "Oh, what happened?" And when they list that, what are we going to do different when they'd have good ones? And what it did is it energized the team to say, "All right, we've got one coming up. We're going to have to do a cell change on Tuesday. Let's think about getting ready and how do we beat that." And ultimately, what we saw over time, without any more TBM help with the setups, they took it down even more. So they continued to make gains to the extent that, and they were making gains that in the beginning, they were all like, "Oh, there is no way we can get there." Even from the first guys, we said, "Let's reduce it 50%." They're like, "Man, you're crazy. That can't happen." And then when we beat it, they were like, "Okay, maybe." Then we did the second one, did it again. And now as they started to do it on their own, it's created this belief, and they were measuring it, and they were using the process of measuring the performance to a target, beating it or not, what went well, what can we improve on, and keeping track of those things. So the fact that you become very focused in just a single element like that, but it was crucial to that plant's performance and that particular cell because of the customer value streams that went through that cell, right? And created some agility for them that they didn't have before.
Yeah, it seems natural, and it's a great proof of concept seeing that even after we leave, that competitiveness and drive to further improve is still instilled in part and mostly due to that management system and way of working. So that's great to hear.
Yeah, it's a combined effort of really your continuous improvement initiatives and focus, but then how do you continue to measure performance and track when you do better and when you don't do as good, and what are you going to do to keep driving performance, and engaging the team to do it, because that really is ultimately that's what everyone is after. How do I create that continuous plan, do, check, act cycle built into just how we work? And so assessing our performance, understanding where we can do better, where we stumbled, what are we going to do to offset the stumbles, how do we correct it, and how do we leverage where we did better to keep driving performance. That gives people a great deal of engagement and feelings about success in the business, which is, the common attribute that people want. They want engagement of their whole team.
Yeah, how else can you bring those frontline teams along in the change? What's keeping their engagement high, momentum high, and spirits high, even when, maybe targets aren't being hit, but there is a drive to continue to improve.
And they can see the focus, right? They can see the commitment to that.
So to wrap things up, Bill and Paul, it's been great speaking with you. Really just want to bring two questions I think that'll have our listeners help conclude what we talked about today and also be thinking about what they may be doing at their own plants and operations. What advice do you both have for companies ready to modernize but might be unsure where to begin?
I'll go first. So my answer would be that like when you think about if you're skeptical about digitizing or you're not sure if you should begin, my answer would be that you can't really afford to wait, but you can mitigate the risk by working with people experienced in guiding companies down the path. So ensure executive alignment and support is huge. Get that outside help, TBN, and make a rollout plan that works for your organization.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think it's, if you have something that you're already doing today, this can accelerate it and absolutely contribute. If you don't have or just have elements of a management system, pulling it together in a more systemic, connected approach will get you some benefit. And then when you can move to digital, will continue to build those benefits and let you get the full value of what can happen. And what it really means is, look, if you have people, we talk about this. If I have 100 people in my plant, in the current state situation, I have just a few driving the thinking and the actions. And now I can bring all 100 minds, hearts and minds together to think about how to be involved in that and be part of creating solutions, solving problems that makes everyone's job better in some respect is far more powerful than something less than all, right?
Yeah, and one last thing: if you're in executive leadership and you're thinking about this, engage with your operational excellence and CI leaders within your organization. And now you may not have, that structure, but there are going to be people within your organization that are, leaders, what titled or not, in operational excellence and continuous improvement, and allow them to be part of the leadership in driving this change.
For those that stay skeptical about digitizing their management system, what would both of you say to shift those people's mindsets?
To me, it's a little bit self-evident, and so I don't want to sound trite, but it's like, well, let's do a proof of concept. Let's stand it up. The great thing about the proof of concept approach that collectively we have with iObeya is we do the proof of concept for an amount of time on a narrowly defined area and scope, and we get it working. And we believe that we can collectively demonstrate the value and the effectiveness of it in a relatively short period of time. But and typically that's a month or two, maybe three, that you can start to see that impact for sure. And then if at the end of that you still say, look, I just don't buy it, I don't think I want to do it, then we shake hands, we're friends, and we go on about our ways. But if you're seeing that value, and now you can go, this is goodness, this is the good path for us, then all right, let's sign off on the proof of concept. Let's roll out the implementation plan and do our proven move across the board.
I mean, I honestly believe, I've said this before, I honestly believe it's not like how, it's not if a management system needs to be digitized, it's when and how. And I think the skepticism, probably the driver for skepticism is like, with all my other priorities, how am I going to inject this work into my day-to-day place? Like, with everything happening and all the competing priorities, can we inject this much disruption into our working day? And my answer would be you can't afford not to. Like you have to. But again, I come back to what I said earlier. You mitigate that risk by working with people with experience. You ensure you have executive alignment and supporting those people within the organization, and you get that outside help, and you make that rollout plan that will work.
Yeah, and I think, Paul, to your point, I think the disruption is not as big as people will think. We can make it pretty painless.
But in the people's minds, though, when they're sitting there spinning at, like lying in bed, it becomes this big monster.
It does.
Well, that is unfortunately all of the time we have today on the manufacturing edge. I just want to say I learned a lot. So a big thank you to you, Bill, to you, Paul, for sharing these insights on how TBM and iObeya is helping manufacturers modernize their management systems and drive real performance improvements. If any of our listeners out there are interested in learning more about the TBM digital management system powered by iObeya, contact us at our website, tbmcg.com. Be sure to tune into this 3-part series on the manufacturing edge, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or directly on our website. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, keep pushing the edge of what's possible in manufacturing.